Admiral Vrexthon stood on the command deck of the Eternal Conquest, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed their target, a small, unremarkable yellow star at the edge of the galaxy's Orion arm. Around him, the bridge crew of the Dominion's 3rd expansion fleet moved with practiced efficiency, their chitinous forms clicking against the metal floors as they performed their duties.
"Status report," Vrexthon commanded, his voice resonating through the translator nodes embedded in the walls. "All 47 vessels report optimal functionality, Admiral," the tactical officer responded. "We are entering the outer boundary of the target system. Long-range sensors are beginning to detect planetary bodies." Vrexthon allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This campaign had been centuries in the planning. The Dominion had conquered over 3,000 star systems, absorbed hundreds of species into their collective, and had never, not once, failed in an expansion effort. Their technology was supreme. Their military might was unquestionable. Their biological engineering had produced warriors perfectly adapted for conquest.
And now, they had come for the species known as humans.
The Dominion's first contact with human signals had occurred nearly 200 of their years ago, when deep space listening posts detected electromagnetic emissions from this distant system. The signals were primitive: radio waves, television broadcasts, early attempts at interstellar communication. The analysts had classified the species as pre-ascendant, meaning they had developed technology but had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel or made contact with the greater galactic community.
Easy prey. The Dominion had spent decades analyzing every scrap of information they could gather about humanity. They had intercepted communications, decoded languages, studied the species' history and culture. What they found was both amusing and concerning. Humans were violent, remarkably, terrifyingly violent, even by Dominion standards. Their history was a tapestry of warfare, conquest, genocide, and destruction. They fought over resources, ideology, religion, territory, and sometimes seemingly for no reason at all. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over, and they had actually used some of them against each other. But they were also fractured, divided into hundreds of nation-states that squabbled endlessly among themselves. They had no unified government, no single military command, no coordinated defense strategy. Their technology, while impressive for such a young species, was still primitive compared to Dominion standards. They had barely reached their closest planetary neighbor, and their spacefaring capabilities were limited to chemical propulsion and simple orbital infrastructure.
The War Council had debated the approach for standard cycles. Some argued for immediate conquest, a swift strike that would decapitate their leadership and crush any resistance before it could organize. Others counseled patience, suggesting they wait until humanity's internal conflicts weakened them further. In the end, Admiral Vrexthon had proposed a middle ground, a show of overwhelming force. They would enter the system, destroy any resistance they encountered, and demand unconditional surrender. If the humans complied, they would be absorbed into the Dominion as a labor caste. If they resisted, they would be exterminated. Simple, efficient, the Dominion way. "Admiral, we are now passing the orbit of the outermost planetary body," the navigation officer announced. "A small dwarf planet designated Pluto." Vrexthon nodded. According to their intelligence, this frozen world was uninhabited, a barren rock of little strategic value. Continue on course. Maintain formation. Begin active scanning for any human vessels or installations. Yes, Admiral. The fleet moved inward,
47 massive warships arranged in a perfect geometric pattern. Each vessel was a masterpiece of Dominion engineering, kilometers long, bristling with weapons, powered by contained singularities that provided virtually unlimited energy. A single ship could devastate a planet. The combined fleet could scour an entire system of life in a matter of hours. They passed the orbit of Neptune, then Uranus. The sensors detected nothing. No ships, no stations, no signs of human activity. This was expected. Humanity's pathetic space program had never ventured this far from their homeworld. "Admiral, I'm detecting something unusual," the sensor officer said, a note of confusion in his voice. Vrekthon's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The system appears different from our projections. Our intelligence indicated the humans had minimal infrastructure beyond their third planet. But I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the inner system. Thousands of them." "Thousands?" Vrexthon moved to the sensor station, his armored feet thundering against the deck. "Show me." The display shifted, and the Admiral felt his secondary hearts skip a beat. The inner solar system was alive with activity. Stations orbited every major planetary body. Ships, thousands of ships, moved between them in complex patterns. And there, around the fourth planet, was something that defied comprehension. A shipyard. But not like any shipyard the Dominion had ever constructed. This was a ring, a complete ring that encircled the red planet, bristling with construction bays and manufacturing facilities. And from that ring, vessels were emerging. Warships, hundreds of them. "This is impossible," Vrexthon whispered. "Our intelligence indicated they had perhaps a dozen spacecraft. Basic orbital stations, nothing like this." "Admiral, our intelligence is over 50 of their years old," the tactical officer reminded him. "The time required for our fleet to reach this system." "I am aware of the travel time," Vrexthon snapped. But even as he said it, doubt crept into his mind. 50 years? That was nothing by Dominion standards, a mere blink of an eye. But for humans, with their short lifespans and rapid reproduction, what had they accomplished in 50 years? "Incoming transmission, Admiral," the communications officer announced. "It's coming from everywhere. Every station, every ship. The same message, repeated on all frequencies." "Play it." The voice that filled the bridge was calm, measured, and spoke in flawless Dominion standard, their own language, perfectly pronounced. "Attention, unidentified vessels. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You are ordered to halt your approach immediately and submit to inspection. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war and responded to accordingly. You have 1 standard hour to acknowledge this transmission and comply with our demands. There will be no further warnings." The bridge fell silent. No species had ever spoken to the Dominion that way. No species had ever dared. Vrexthon straightened to his full height. "Ignore their pathetic demands. All ships increase to maximum sublight speed. We will show these primitives the consequences of threatening the Dominion." The fleet surged forward. Part 2. First Contact. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the Combat Information Center of the UNS Defiance, humanity's first purpose-built interstellar warship. Around her, dozens of officers and specialists monitored their stations, tracking the alien fleet as it continued its approach. "They're not slowing down. Lieutenant Commander Park reported from the tactical station. All 47 vessels maintaining formation, accelerating toward the inner system. Chen nodded, her expression unreadable. She had trained for this moment for 15 years, ever since humanity's deep space sensor network had first detected the approaching fleet. 15 years to prepare, to build, to arm themselves against an enemy they knew nothing about except that it was coming. Time to weapons range?
At current acceleration, they'll reach our outer defense perimeter in approximately 4 hours.
Chen turned to the communications officer. Status of the message? Transmitted on all frequencies, Commander. They're definitely receiving it. No response yet. They won't respond. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the speakers. He was commanding from the orbital fortress above Mars, coordinating the system-wide defense. They're used to species that surrender at the first show of force. They think we're bluffing. Then we'll have to disabuse them of that notion, Chen replied. Admiral, request permission to initiate Stage 1 of the Welcoming Committee.
A pause. Permission granted, Commander. Show them what humanity has learned.
Chen allowed herself a small smile. Helm, take us to Point Alpha. All ships, form up on my command. It's time to introduce ourselves.
The Defiance accelerated, leading a formation of 30 heavy cruisers toward the approaching alien fleet. They were outnumbered, outmassed, and, according to all available intelligence, outgunned. The alien ships were enormous, each one dwarfing even humanity's largest vessels.
But size wasn't everything. Humanity's first warning that they were not alone in the universe had come 60 years ago when radio telescopes detected structured signals from deep space. At first, the scientific community had celebrated proof of intelligent extraterrestrial life. But as they analyzed the signals more carefully, joy turned to concern, and concern to fear. The signals weren't meant for humanity. They were military communications, orders, tactical data, fleet movements, and the translation algorithms that the world's linguists painstakingly developed revealed a horrifying truth. Someone was coming. A vast armada launched toward Earth with conquest as its goal. The world had a choice. They could spend their remaining time fighting among themselves, or they could unite and prepare. For the first time in human history, they chose unity. The United Nations transformed from a debating society into a true world government. National militaries merged into a single force. Scientists shared their secrets. Rival nations pooled their resources. Every factory, every laboratory, every university, all dedicated to a single purpose: survival. 50 years of preparation, 50 years of innovation, 50 years of building. And now, the enemy had finally arrived. "We're approaching weapons range, Commander," Park announced. "The alien vessels are still not responding to hails." "Then hail them again," Chen ordered. "One last chance." The communications officer transmitted. "Attention unidentified vessels. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the United Nations ship Defiance. You have ignored our warnings and continued your hostile approach. If you do not immediately reverse course and submit to inspection, we will be forced to defend ourselves. This is your final warning." The response came quickly this time, a burst of alien language that the translation software struggled to process. When the words finally appeared on screen, Chen's jaw tightened. "They say we are to surrender immediately or face extermination," the communications officer reported. "They say we are primitives who cannot comprehend the power of the Dominion. They demand we kneel." Chen's smile widened, though it held no warmth. "Kneel? They want us to kneel?" She opened a channel to the fleet. All ships, this is Commander Chen. The enemy has rejected our offer of peaceful resolution. They have demanded our surrender. They have called us primitives. She paused, letting the words sink in. Throughout our history, humanity has faced those who sought to conquer us, enslave us, exterminate us. And throughout our history, we have had one answer for tyrants and would-be masters. She took a breath. We do not kneel. All ships, engage. Part 3. The lesson begins. Admiral Vrexthon watched with something approaching amusement as the human vessels approached. They were so small, barely larger than the Dominion's escort craft. And they were so few, only 30 of them against his 47 capital ships. The primitives wish to fight, he observed. Very well. Let them learn the price of defiance. Forward batteries, target the lead vessel. Fire when ready. The Eternal Conquest's main weapon, a plasma lance capable of cutting through any known armor, powered up with a rising whine. The targeting computer locked onto the human command ship. Firing. A beam of superheated plasma streaked across space, traveling at nearly half the speed of light. At this range, the humans would have no time to... The beam struck empty space. The human ship was simply gone. What? Vrexthon leaned forward. Where did they go? The sensor officer's voice cracked. Admiral, the enemy vessel has appeared behind us. Distance 3,000 kilometers. It's... The Eternal Conquest shuddered as something impacted its rear shields. Damage report. Shields at 70%? The impact was... Admiral, I don't understand. The projectile was moving at 95% of light speed. Vrexthon's blood ran cold. Relativistic weapons. The humans had developed relativistic weapons. Such technology was theoretically possible, but the engineering challenges were considered insurmountable. The energy requirements alone. Another impact. Then another. The ship shuddered under a relentless barrage. "Return fire!" Vrexthon screamed. "Target that ship and destroy it!" We can't lock on. They keep disappearing. The sensor officer was right. The human ships weren't just fast. They were somehow jumping from point to point, appearing and disappearing in patterns that made no tactical sense. One moment a ship would be off the starboard bow, the next it would be behind them, already firing. All ships, evasive maneuvers, pattern Omega 7. But the Dominion fleet was built for overwhelming force, not maneuverability. Their ships were massive, powerful, but slow to react. The human vessels danced around them like predators harrying wounded prey. The glorious victory is reporting critical damage. The infinite Dominion has lost main power. The crushing fist is... Admiral, the crushing fist is gone. It just detonated. Vrexthon stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than 5 minutes, he had lost a capital ship, and 2 more were crippled. The human fleet had suffered no casualties at all. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "They were primitives. They were supposed to be primitives." "Admiral, the tactical officer," said, his voice trembling. "I'm detecting additional contacts emerging from behind the 4th planet. Many additional contacts." The display updated. 200 new ships. Then 500. Then 1,000. They kept coming. "By the Dominion," Vrexthon breathed. "What have they built?"
Commander Chen watched the tactical display with satisfaction as the alien fleet fell into disarray. The Alcubierre drives had worked perfectly, each jump precisely calculated, each exit point positioned for optimal firing solutions. The railguns were performing beyond specifications, accelerating their tungsten projectiles to relativistic speeds that turned simple metal slugs into weapons of apocalyptic power. But she knew this was just the beginning. "The reserve fleet is in position," Admiral Morrison reported. "Commander, you may proceed with Stage 2. "Understood, Admiral." Chen opened the fleet channel again. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions. Let the big boys through." The human cruisers broke off their attack, retreating toward Mars with practiced precision. The alien fleet, battered but still dangerous, began to regroup. They didn't see what was coming until it was too late. The Titan-class dreadnoughts emerged from behind Mars, 12 vessels, each one 5 kilometers long, armed with weapon systems that represented the culmination of 50 years of desperate innovation. They had been humanity's secret project, built in hidden shipyards on the dark side of Earth's moon, their existence known only to the highest levels of government. Each dreadnought carried a Casimir reactor, a device that extracted energy from the quantum vacuum itself, providing effectively unlimited power. Each one was equipped with shields that could withstand direct nuclear strikes. Each one carried enough firepower to devastate a continent. And they were angry. "This is Admiral Morrison to the Dominion fleet. You came to our home seeking conquest. You threatened our people with extermination. You demanded we kneel." The dreadnoughts opened fire. "We have a different proposal." The vacuum of space lit up with the fire of a species that had spent half a century preparing for this moment. Plasma beams, railgun salvos, guided missiles carrying antimatter warheads, all converged on the alien fleet in a storm of destruction that defied comprehension. "Surrender now, and we will show you the mercy you would have denied us. Refuse, and you will learn what humanity does to those who threaten our existence." Admiral Vrexthon watched 3 more of his ships explode in quick succession. His tactical display was a nightmare of red alerts and damage reports. The fleet that had been the pride of the Dominion, 47 vessels that had never known defeat, was being systematically annihilated. "This is not possible," he kept repeating. "This is not possible." But it was happening. Right before his eyes, it was happening. "Admiral," the communications officer shouted, "I'm receiving messages from across the fleet. The captains are requesting permission to retreat." Retreat. The word was almost obscene. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion had never retreated. In 3,000 years of conquest, no enemy had ever forced them to withdraw. But this enemy, these humans. "Signal the fleet," Vrexthon said, the words tasting like ash. "All ships, prepare for emergency translation to hyperspace. We must—" "Admiral, the hyperdrive is offline. Engineering reports that the dimensional manifolds have been disrupted somehow. They can't initiate the translation sequence." Vrexthon felt the last of his hope die. "What do you mean, disrupted?" "They're saying something is interfering with the hyperspace interface, some kind of field that makes translation impossible." The Admiral turned to look at the tactical display again. The human dreadnoughts were advancing, still firing, still destroying his ships. And now he noticed something he had missed before. A network of satellites positioned throughout the system, each one emitting a faint but detectable energy signature. They had built a trap. These primitives, these humans, had built a trap, and his entire fleet
had walked right into it. "All ships," Vrexthorn transmitted, "concentrate fire on those satellites. If we can create a gap in their network—"
He never finished the sentence. The Eternal Conquest's shields failed under a concentrated barrage from 3 human dreadnoughts. The hull breached in a dozen places simultaneously. The plasma lance exploded, sending cascading failures through every system on the ship.
Admiral Vrexthon, conqueror of 17 worlds, died as his command deck collapsed around him. He was not the last. Part 4. The Reckoning. The battle lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of desperate fighting, of alien ships trying to escape a trap they didn't understand, of human weapons systematically dismantling a fleet that had never known defeat. By the end, there was nothing left. Commander Chen stood on the observation deck of the Defiance, looking out at the debris field that had once been the Dominion 3rd Expansion Fleet. Twisted metal, frozen gases, and the occasional piece of organic material drifted through space, the remains of 47 capital ships and their crews. "Final casualty report," Lieutenant Commander Park said, joining her at the window. "The Dominion fleet has been completely destroyed. No survivors detected." Chen nodded slowly. "And our losses?" 7 ships damaged, 2 severely. 63 personnel killed, another 112 wounded. Park paused. They fought harder near the end, when they realized they couldn't escape. Cornered animals always do. Chen turned away from the window. "What about the hyperspace field?" "Still active. Engineering says it'll hold for another 72 hours before the satellites need recharging." "That won't be necessary. The battle is over." But even as she said it, Chen knew that the war had only begun. The Dominion had sent 1 fleet. When that fleet didn't return, they would send more. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a conflict that might last generations. Still, they had won the first battle. Against overwhelming odds, against an enemy that had conquered thousands of worlds, humanity had stood its ground and prevailed. That had to count for something. "Commander, the communications officer called from across the deck. We're receiving a transmission from Earth, Priority Alpha." "Put it through." Secretary General Okonkwo's face appeared on the screen. The leader of the United Nations, and thus all of humanity, looked older than her 70 years, worn down by decades of preparation for a war that many had hoped would never come. "Commander Chen, Admiral Morrison has briefed me on the battle. On behalf of all humanity, I offer our gratitude for your service today." "Thank you, Madam Secretary General. But the real work is just beginning." "I know." Okonkwo's expression was grim. "We've analyzed the data from the battle. Based on the size of the Dominion, at least according to the fragmentary intelligence we've gathered, this fleet represented perhaps 2% of their total military capability." 2%. They had thrown everything they had at 2% of the enemy's strength. "The Council is convening an emergency session," Okonkwo continued. "We need to decide our next steps. Do we wait for them to come to us again, or do we take the fight to them?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Madam Secretary General, I'm a soldier, not a politician. But I know this much. We caught them by surprise today. They expected primitives and found something else entirely. That advantage won't last. The longer we wait, the more time they have to prepare, to adapt, to understand what they're dealing with." "You're advocating an offensive strategy." "I'm advocating that we don't give them a chance to regroup. They came to our home to conquer us. They would have enslaved us or killed us all without a second thought. If we let them dictate the pace of this war, we will lose. We don't have the numbers or the resources for a prolonged defensive conflict." Okonkwo was silent for a long moment.
The Council will take your recommendations under advisement, Commander. In the meantime, continue recovery operations. I want every piece of alien technology collected and analyzed. We need to understand what we're dealing with.
Yes, Madam Secretary General. The transmission ended. Chen turned back to the window, looking out at the debris field and the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was waiting. Thousands of worlds, countless ships, an empire that had never known defeat. Until now. Commander? Park was still there, waiting. Begin recovery operations, Chen ordered. Every piece of hull, every fragment of technology, every scrap of data. We're going to need all of it for what comes next. What does come next, Commander? Chen's smile was cold. We introduce ourselves to the neighbors. Part 5. The Dominion Learns. 3 months later, the first reports reached the Dominion homeworld. High Counselor Yethvol read the transmission in his private chambers, his ancient eyes scanning the encrypted text with growing disbelief. The third expansion fleet, Vrexthon's fleet, had been destroyed completely. Not a single ship had returned. Not a single distress signal had been received. 47 capital ships and over 200,000 soldiers simply gone. The last message from Vrexthon, transmitted moments before his death, was fragmentary at best. But the data it contained was clear enough. The humans had weapons the Dominion had never seen. Ships that could jump through space without hyperdrives. Energy weapons of impossible power. And they had built all of it in 50 years. 50 years! The Dominion had existed for 30,000 years. In that time, they had conquered 3,000 worlds, absorbed hundreds of species, and built an empire that spanned a significant portion of the galaxy. They had developed technologies that other species could barely comprehend. They had elevated biological engineering to an art form, creating soldier castes bred for war, worker castes designed for labor, thinker castes optimized for innovation. And in 50 years, a species of soft, fragile, short-lived creatures had developed weapons that made Dominion technology look primitive. How? How was it possible? Yureth Vol called an emergency session of the High Council. The 12 most powerful beings in the Dominion assembled in the Great Chamber. Their ancient forms gathered around the tactical display that showed the Sol system, the system that had just annihilated an entire fleet. "This is impossible," Counselor Vexthrin declared. "No species develops this quickly. It violates every principle of technological evolution." "And yet the evidence is clear," Yurethvol replied. "Our fleet is gone. The humans are responsible." "Then we send another fleet," Counselor Praxthul suggested. "A larger one, 10 times the size, 100 times. Eventually, we will overwhelm them through sheer numbers." "Will we?" Yerethval asked. "Consider, 50 years ago, they had barely reached their moon. Today, they have ships that can destroy our capital vessels with apparent ease. What will they have in another 50 years? Another century?" The council fell silent. "We are facing something unprecedented," Yurethvol continued. "A species that innovates at a rate we cannot comprehend. Every day that passes, they grow stronger. Every day that we delay, the gap between us widens." "Then what do you propose?" Counselor Vexthrin demanded. "That we surrender? That we abandon 30,000 years of conquest because one species has proven difficult?" "I propose that we learn from our mistake. We underestimated them. We assumed they were like every other pre-ascendant species we have encountered. They are not. Yerethvol's voice was grave. I propose that we study them, understand them, learn what makes them different. And then, when we are ready, when we truly understand what we are dealing with, we strike with everything we have. And if they attack us first?
Yerethvol had no answer for that.
Part 6. Humanity Strikes. The first human expedition beyond the solar system launched 6 months after the Battle of Sol, as historians would come to call it. A fleet of 20 ships, led by the dreadnought Unity, departed from the Mars shipyards with a simple mission: reconnaissance. Find the Dominion, learn their capabilities, identify their weaknesses. Commander Chen had been promoted to admiral and given command of the expedition. As the Unity engaged its Alcubierre drive and reality twisted around them, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had grown up in the shadow of the coming invasion. Her parents had been among the first generation to know, the generation that had transformed the world, that had set aside centuries of conflict and united humanity against an external threat. Her earliest memories were of emergency drills, of patriotic propaganda, of a society organized entirely around preparation for war. She had never known peace. None of her generation had. From birth, they had been trained, educated, conditioned for a conflict that might not come in their lifetimes. But it had come, and now they were taking the fight to the enemy. "Admiral, we're approaching the target system," the navigation officer reported. "Sensors are detecting significant activity." Chen leaned forward. "Show me." The display lit up with data. The system they had targeted, designated Alpha 7 in human records, was a known Dominion colony world. Intelligence suggested it was a minor agricultural planet, lightly defended. The intelligence was wrong. The system was heavily fortified. Orbital platforms, defense satellites, a small fleet of warships, and on the planet itself, massive structures that could only be military installations. "It's a fortress," Lieutenant Commander Park observed. "They've reinforced every colony in the sector." "They learned from the battle," Chen replied. "They're preparing for us." She studied the display for a moment. "How many ships?" 12, Admiral. Capital class, plus support vessels. "Shields?" "Active. Heavy configuration." Chen smiled. "Let's test them. All ships, battle stations. We're going in." The human fleet surged forward, and the Battle of Alpha 7 began. It was over in 3 hours. The Dominion defenders fought bravely. Chen had to give them that. They adapted quickly, trying to counter the human tactics they had no doubt studied from the Battle of Sol. But humanity had adapted too. New weapons, new tactics, new technologies developed in the 6 months since the first engagement. The Dominion couldn't keep up. By the time the human fleet withdrew, all 12 enemy capital ships were destroyed, and the orbital infrastructure was in ruins. The colony itself was untouched. Chen had given strict orders to avoid civilian casualties unless absolutely necessary. But the message was clear. Humanity could strike anywhere, and there was nothing the Dominion could do to stop them. Part 7. The War Expands. Over the next 2 years, humanity launched over 40 expeditions into Dominion space. They struck shipyards, supply depots, communication relays, and military installations. They never held territory. Their numbers were still too small for occupation, but they destroyed everything they could reach. And they learned. Each captured ship, each recovered data core, each interrogated prisoner added to humanity's understanding of their enemy. They learned about the Dominion's history, its politics, its internal rivalries. They learned about the other species that had been absorbed into the collective, some willingly, some by force. They learned about the biological engineering that produced the Dominion's specialized castes.
And they used what they learned.
Dr. Elizabeth Okafor led the research team that developed the first human bioweapon, a tailored virus designed to target only Dominion soldier caste DNA. It was never deployed. The ethical debates it sparked threatened to tear the United Nations apart. But its existence proved a point. Humanity could fight on any level. Meanwhile, the engineering teams reverse-engineered Dominion hyperspace technology, developing a hybrid system that combined the best features of both species' FTL methods. Human ships became faster, more maneuverable, capable of striking targets deep in Dominion space that had previously been unreachable. The Dominion tried to respond. They sent fleets, large fleets, to reclaim the systems humanity had attacked. But the human forces were never there when they arrived. Hit and run, strike and fade. 1,000 cuts that bled the enemy dry while never offering a decisive engagement. It was a strategy born of necessity. Humanity still didn't have the numbers to fight the Dominion head-on, but it proved devastatingly effective. The Dominion's logistics strained under the constant attacks. Their colonies demanded protection that the military couldn't provide. Political tensions that had simmered for centuries began to boil. And then humanity discovered the resistance. Part 8, Allies. The Vakrin had been absorbed by the Dominion over 2,000 years ago. Once a proud spacefaring species, they had been reduced to a labor caste, their culture suppressed, their history erased. But they had never forgotten. Deep in the caverns beneath their homeworld, Vakrin resistance cells had maintained the old ways for generations. They preserved their language, their traditions, their identity. And they waited for the day when they could strike back at their oppressors. That day came when a human reconnaissance team made contact with a Vakrin mining operation in the outer reaches of the system designated Gamma 12. The meeting was tense at first. The Vakrin had never encountered humans before, and decades of Dominion propaganda had taught them to fear and distrust other species. But when the human commander explained that they were at war with the Dominion, that they had destroyed entire fleets, attacked military installations, and had never once been defeated, the Vakrin's attitude changed. "You are the ones," the Vakrin leader said, his translator device rendering the words in accented but understandable English. "The ones from the outer arm. We have heard rumors. We thought they were myths." "No myths," Commander Oyalaran replied. "We're very real, and we're looking for allies." The alliance that emerged from that first contact would change the course of the war. The Vakrin knew the Dominion from the inside, its weaknesses, its blind spots, its internal politics. They knew which species were loyal and which were waiting for an opportunity to rebel. They knew the locations of secret facilities, hidden supply caches, and clandestine communication networks. And there were others. The Therim, a species of engineers whose homeworld the Dominion had destroyed 5 centuries ago. The Krevith, telepathic beings who had been used as interrogators, but who harbored deep resentment toward their masters. The Yolvan, warriors whose honor-bound culture had never accepted their defeat. One by one, humanity found them, inspired them, armed them. The rebellion spread. Part 9. The Dominion Fractures. High Counselor Urethval watched the reports with a growing sense of despair. Colony after colony was in revolt. Species that had been loyal for millennia were suddenly rising up, armed with weapons of human design. The military was stretched impossibly thin, fighting on 100 fronts against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. And the humans themselves, they had grown stronger than anyone had imagined possible. Their fleets now numbered in the hundreds. Their weapons had evolved far beyond what the Dominion had encountered in the first battle. They had developed new technologies, shielding systems that seemed to absorb energy, propulsion methods that defied conventional physics, weapons that could pierce any armor. In 5 years, they had transformed from a minor nuisance into an existential threat. "We must sue for peace," Councillor Vexthrin said at the Emergency Council session. "Negotiate an end to this conflict before we lose everything." "Peace?" Councillor Praxthel scoffed. "You would have us kneel to these primates?" "I would have us survive," Vecthrin shouted. "Look at the data! We are losing this war! Every day more systems fall! Every day more species rebel! Every day the humans grow stronger while we grow weaker! If we sue for peace, we show weakness. Other species will be encouraged to revolt. The Empire will collapse." "The Empire is already collapsing." The council dissolved into chaos, ancient rivalries and political factions erupting as the reality of their situation became impossible to deny. In 10,000 years, the Dominion had never faced such a crisis. They had no protocols for defeat, no traditions of negotiation, no concept of compromise. They had only ever known how to conquer. And now, they were being conquered in return. Part 10. The Final Offensive. 7 years after the Battle of Sol, humanity launched its final offensive against the Dominion. The United Nations fleet, now comprising over 2,000 ships, supplemented by allied vessels from a dozen liberated species, converged on the Dominion homeworld. It was the largest military operation in human history and the most ambitious. The plan was simple: strike at the heart of the enemy and end the war with a single, decisive blow. Admiral Chen commanded from the bridge of the New Dawn, humanity's newest and most powerful vessel. She was 53 years old now, her hair gray, her face lined with the stresses of command. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, and her voice was steady as she addressed her fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. For 7 years we have fought this war. We have bled, we have sacrificed, we have lost friends and family to an enemy that sought to enslave us. But we never gave up. We never surrendered. And now we stand at the gates of their homeworld." She paused, looking at the tactical display. The Dominion's last fleet, everything they had left, was arrayed in defense of their home. Thousands of ships, from ancient battle cruisers to newly constructed vessels. It was a formidable force. But humanity had faced formidable forces before. "They came to our home to conquer us," Chen continued. "They called us primitives. They demanded we kneel. Today, we show them what primitives can do." The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 2 massive fleets, comprising thousands of ships and millions of lives, clashing in the shadow of an ancient world. The vacuum of space lit up with weapons fire, explosions, and the deaths of warriors from a dozen species. The Dominion fought with the desperation of the cornered. They knew that this was their last stand, that there would be no retreat, no reinforcements. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, sacrificing ships in suicide runs, deploying weapons that had been forbidden for millennia. But humanity had spent 7 years preparing for this moment. 7 years of studying their enemy, developing countermeasures, training for every conceivable scenario. And they had something the Dominion didn't: allies who knew every weakness, every flaw, every vulnerability. The battle lasted 12 hours. When it was over, the Dominion fleet was destroyed. Part 11. The Reckoning. Admiral Chen stood in the great hall of the Dominion Council, looking at the beings who had once ruled a significant portion of the galaxy. The 12 counselors were arranged in their traditional positions, but there was nothing regal about them now. They were prisoners, their guards a mixed force of humans and liberated species. "High Counselor Yerth Vol," Chen said, her voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "On behalf of the United Nations of Earth and our allied species, I accept your unconditional surrender." Yereth Vol's ancient eyes met hers. "You have won, human. But I must know, how? How did you accomplish in 7 years what no species has accomplished in 30,000? Chen considered the question. "Do you really want to know? I have spent my entire life studying other species, trying to understand what drives them, what limits them. Never have I encountered anything like humanity. You should not have been able to do what you did. By every metric we measure, by every model we use, you should have failed." "Perhaps that's the problem," Chen replied. "You measure, you model, you calculate, but you never understood." "Understood what?" Chen stepped closer to the ancient counselor. 30,000 years ago, when your species first reached for the stars, you were not so different from us. You were curious, ambitious, driven. But somewhere along the way, you lost that spark. You became complacent. You believed your own mythology of supremacy. You stopped growing." She shook her head. "We never had the luxury of complacency. Our history is one long story of struggle, against our environment, against each other, against our own limitations. We fought and bled and died just to survive. And every time we were knocked down, we got back up stronger than before." "But the technology is just a tool. The real weapon was always us. Our determination, our creativity, our refusal to accept limits." Chen smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You came to our system expecting primitives. What you found was a species forged in fire, tempered by struggle, and united by a common purpose." She turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. "You asked how we accomplished what we did. The answer is simple. You tried to conquer us. That was your first mistake." She looked back at the defeated counselors. "We don't react well to threats. Never have, never will." And with that, she walked out, leaving the fallen masters of a dying empire to contemplate their failure. Part 12. A New Dawn. The Treaty of Sol was signed 1 year after the Battle of the Dominion homeworld. It formally ended the war and established the terms of surrender. The Dominion was dissolved, its territory divided among the liberated species. The conquered races were freed, their homeworlds returned to them. The soldier castes were disbanded, the genetic engineering programs terminated, the structures of oppression dismantled. It was the largest political reorganization in galactic history. Humanity emerged from the war transformed. They were no longer the isolated species clinging to a single planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. They were liberators, allies, leaders. The other species looked to them for guidance, for protection, for inspiration. Some humans embraced this new role. Others were uncomfortable with it. There were debates about what humanity's place in the galaxy should be, about whether they should build an empire of their own or step back and let others chart their own courses. In the end, they chose a middle path. The Galactic Federation was established, a democratic alliance of species, with humanity as a founding member but not a ruler. Power was shared. Decisions were made collectively. The mistakes of the Dominion would not be repeated.
Admiral Chen retired from military service and spent her remaining years teaching at the Naval Academy on Mars. She trained a new generation of officers, passing on the lessons she had learned in war and peace. When she died at 94, she was mourned across 100 worlds. Commander, later Ambassador, Park became humanity's chief diplomat, negotiating trade agreements and settling disputes between species who had never had to interact as equals. She was known for her patience, her wisdom, and her ability to find common ground where none seemed to exist. Secretary-General Okonkwo lived long enough to see the Federation established, then passed peacefully in her sleep, satisfied that her life's work was complete. She was buried on Earth in a small ceremony attended by representatives from every member species. And humanity? They kept building, kept exploring, kept pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Within a century, they had expanded to 100 worlds. Within a millennium, they had spread across the galaxy. They never forgot the war. Every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Seoul, humans everywhere paused to remember. They remembered the fallen, the sacrificed, the heroes known and unknown. They remembered the fear and the triumph, the despair and the hope. And they remembered the lesson they had taught the galaxy. Some species are not meant to be conquered. Epilogue. The Warning. 10,000 years later, a new species entered the galaxy. They came from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy, crossing the void between galaxies in generation ships that had traveled for millions of years. They were curious, ambitious, driven, much like humanity had once been. And they made the mistake of sending a fleet to the Sol system, demanding tribute and submission. The response they received was the same message that had been sent to the Dominion 10,000 years before. Attention, unidentified vessels. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. You are ordered to halt your approach immediately and submit to inspection. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war and responded to accordingly. You have 1 standard hour to acknowledge this transmission and comply with our demands. There will be no further warnings. The alien commander, confident in the superiority of his fleet and his species, ignored the warning. He should have paid more attention to history. Because when the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, ships of a design that defied comprehension, weapons that bent the laws of physics, crews that had been fighting and winning wars for 10 millennia, the aliens finally understood what every other species had learned the hard way. They had entered the solar system. Not a single soul returned.